What if everything you believe about time is wrong? What if the ticking of the clock, the aging of your body, the relentless feeling that this moment is slipping away, what if none of it reflects what is actually happening in the universe? What if time, as you experience it, is not a fundamental feature of reality, but a construction of your mind, an elegant illusion your consciousness built to prevent you from drowning in infinite chaos? This is not philosophy. This is not metaphor. This is what some of the greatest physicists who have ever lived are telling us. And once you understand what they mean, you will never look at a clock the same way again. Let us start where all revolutions in physics begin, with Albert Einstein. In 1905, a 26-year-old patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, published a paper that would shatter humanity's understanding of time forever. The paper was called On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies, and within its pages, Einstein demonstrated something that no one had seriously considered before. Time is not universal. It does not flow at the same rate for everyone. Two people moving at different speeds through space will experience time passing at different rates, and both of them are entirely correct. This was not a thought experiment. This was a mathematical proof, and it has since been confirmed by every single experiment ever conducted to test it. In 1971, physicists Joseph Haefele and Richard Keating placed cesium atomic clocks on commercial aircraft and flew them around the world, once eastward, once westward. When the planes landed and the airborne clocks were compared to the reference clocks that remained on the ground, the readings disagreed. The clocks that had travelled faster through space had ticked fewer times, not because they were broken, not because of air pressure or vibration or any mechanical disturbance, because time itself had moved slower for them. The differences were measured in nanoseconds, billionths of a second, but they were real, and they matched Einstein's predictions with extraordinary precision. The Haefele-Keating experiment was only the beginning. In 2010, physicists at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Boulder, Colorado, used aluminum-ion clocks, the most precise timekeeping devices ever built, to detect time dilation at everyday scales. They showed that raising a clock by just 33 centimeters, roughly 1 foot above a table, caused it to tick faster than the clock below. Time dilation is not an exotic effect reserved for astronauts and particle accelerators. It is happening across the height of your own body, right now, in measurable quantities. The universe does not grant you a single, unified experience of time. It gives you a slightly different time at every altitude, at every velocity, at every point, in every gravitational field. This effect is called time dilation, and it is not a quirk of exotic laboratory conditions. It is happening to you right now. Your feet, which are slightly closer to the center of the earth than your head, are aging infinitesimally slower than your brain. The difference is immeasurably small in human terms, but it is there. It is real. It is a property of the universe itself. But Einstein did not stop with speed. 10 years after his first revolution, in his general theory of relativity, he revealed something even more unsettling. Time does not only change with velocity, it changes with gravity. The stronger the gravitational field you sit in, the slower time passes for you relative to someone in a weaker field. Stand at the base of a mountain, and your clock will tick slightly slower than the clock at the summit. Live on the ground floor of a building for your entire life, and you will age fractionally less than someone living on the top floor. These differences are not theoretical, they are measured constantly. The GPS satellites orbiting Earth must correct for both gravitational and velocity time dilation every single second. Without these corrections, the navigation system would accumulate errors of roughly 10 kilometers per day. Your phone's ability to locate you on a map is direct, practical proof that time does not flow at the same rate everywhere. Now pause and consider what this actually means. If time flows at different rates depending on where you are and how fast you are moving, then there is no single now that the entire universe shares. Your present moment is not the same as the present moment for someone on the International Space Station. It is not the same as the present moment for a particle accelerating through CERN. The moment you call right now is, from another frame of reference, already in the past or has not happened yet. This is not a matter of perception or measurement delay. This is a structural property of reality. Einstein's mathematics makes it absolutely clear. Simultaneity is relative. Two events that are simultaneous for one observer are not simultaneous for another. And if there is no universal now, then the very foundation of our experience of time, the idea that the present is special, that it is the only moment that truly exists, collapses. Einstein understood this implication completely, and it led him to a conclusion that most people never hear about, a conclusion that changes everything. Imagine the universe not as something that unfolds moment by moment, like a film projecting one frame at a time. Instead, imagine it as a four-dimensional block, a structure in which past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, frozen together like layers in a block of ice. In this model, which physicists call the block universe, nothing is truly happening now. The year you were born is not gone. The moment of your death is not yet to come. Both exist as fixed coordinates in this four-dimensional structure, just as the city of Tokyo exists on a globe, whether or not you are currently visiting it. This is not speculation from the fringes of science. This is the direct, geometric interpretation of Einstein's own equations. The mathematics of relativity does not distinguish between past, present, and future. It treats them as equivalent dimensions of a single entity space-time. In space-time, every event that has ever occurred or will ever occur exists as a fixed point. The Big Bang is there. The extinction of the dinosaurs is there. This very sentence you are hearing right now is there. And whatever will happen a billion years from now is also there. All of it coexists. The philosopher of physics Hilary Putnam formalized this idea in what is now called the Rietvik-Putnam argument. He demonstrated that if special relativity is correct, and it is the most precisely tested theory in all of physics, then any event that is in the future for you is already in the present or past for some other legitimate observer somewhere in the universe. And if that event is real for them, it must be real, period. Reality does not depend on who is looking at it. This means the future is not open. It is not undetermined. It is already there, waiting in the four-dimensional block, as solid and as permanent as the moment you are experiencing right now. Not every physicist accepts this interpretation. Some, like the cosmologist Lee Smolin, have argued passionately that time is not an illusion, but the most fundamental feature of reality, that the block universe is a mathematical artifact, not a description of what truly exists. Smolin argues that the present moment is genuinely special, that the future is genuinely open, and that the laws of physics themselves may evolve over time. This is a minority position in theoretical physics, but it is held by serious thinkers. The debate is far from settled. What is settled is this: our naive, everyday understanding of time, the sense that the past is gone, the future has not happened, and only the present is real, cannot survive contact with the physics. Something about that picture is deeply, fundamentally wrong. The question is, what replaces it? Einstein himself took this seriously. When his lifelong friend Michel Besso died in March of 1955, just weeks before Einstein's own death, Einstein wrote a letter to Besso's family that contains one of the most haunting sentences in the history of science. He wrote, "Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me." That means nothing. For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. He was not being poetic. He was not offering consolation in the language of metaphor. He was stating, in precise terms, what his life's work had shown him. The flow of time, the sense that the past is gone, that the present is fleeting, that the future is approaching, is an illusion. A stubborn one, a persistent one, but an illusion nonetheless. But the block universe raises a terrifying question. If the future already exists, if every moment is as real and as permanent as every other moment, then what is your experience of time? Why do you feel it moving? Why does this moment feel special, feel like now, while the moment 5 minutes ago feels like it is gone? If all moments exist equally in the block, why do you experience them one at a time, in sequence, flowing forward? The equations of physics offer no answer to this question. And that silence is itself one of the most important clues in all of science. Let us go deeper. In 1967, physicists Wheeler-DeWitt and John Archibald Wheeler attempted something no one had ever done before. They tried to write a single equation that would describe the quantum state of the entire universe, not a single particle, not a single field, not a single region of space-time. Everything, all of reality, captured in one mathematical expression. The result is now known as the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, and when they derived it, when they followed the rules of quantum mechanics to their logical conclusion for the universe as a whole, they discovered something that no one expected. Time was missing. The equation that describes the quantum state of the entire universe contains no variable for time. There is no t. The universe, at its most fundamental quantum mechanical description, does not appear to evolve. It does not change. It does not flow from one state to another. It simply is. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation describes a frozen, timeless reality, a cosmic structure that exists all at once, with no before and no after. Wheeler, who coined the term black hole and mentored a generation of physicists, including Richard Feynman, was not a fringe figure. He was one of the architects of nuclear physics and a central figure in 20th century theoretical physics. When he and DeWitt arrived at a timeless equation for the universe, the physics community could not dismiss it as speculation. It was the straightforward result of applying well-established quantum principles to cosmology. This was not a mistake. DeWitt and Wheeler checked and rechecked the mathematics. Other physicists verified it independently. The absence of time was not an error in their formulation, it was the formulation's central, inescapable prediction. When you apply quantum mechanics to the entire universe, time disappears. This result has troubled physicists for over half a century. It is known as the problem of time in quantum gravity, and it remains one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of physics. Every attempt to write a complete quantum theory of the universe, whether it is string theory, loop quantum gravity, causal dynamical triangulations, or any other approach, runs into the same wall. Time, as we experience it, does not appear in the fundamental equations that describe reality at its deepest level. The Italian physicist Carlo Rovelli, one of the founders of loop quantum gravity, has spent decades wrestling with this problem. His conclusion is both elegant and disturbing. Time does not exist at the fundamental level of reality. What we call time is not a flow, but an emergent phenomenon, something that arises from the relationships between physical systems, the way temperature arises from the random motion of molecules. No single molecule has a temperature. Temperature is a statistical property that emerges when you have billions of molecules interacting. In the same way, Rovelli argues, no fundamental equation contains time. Time is a statistical property that emerges when you have complex systems like brains interacting with the rest of the universe. Think about what this means. Temperature feels real. When you touch a hot stove, the sensation of heat is vivid and immediate and undeniable. But at the level of individual atoms, there is no heat. There is only motion particles bouncing faster or slower. The heat is something your nervous system constructs from that underlying reality. Rovelli is telling us that time works the same way. The flow of moments, the passage from past to future, the feeling that now is special, these are constructions. They are real experiences, built from something deeper, but the deeper reality contains no time at all. Rovelli goes even further with what he calls the thermal time hypothesis. Working with the mathematician Alain Connes, he proposed that what we perceive as the flow of time is actually a thermodynamic phenomenon, that the direction and rate of temporal experience are determined by the statistical state of the system we are embedded in. In other words, time does not flow because the universe has some built-in clock. Time flows because we are macroscopic beings, interacting with an enormous number of microscopic degrees of freedom, and the statistical behavior of those interactions creates the appearance of a temporal direction. If you could somehow perceive the universe at the level of individual quantum events, there would be no before and no after. There would be only relationships, correlations between physical quantities, with no inherent ordering. This is a staggering claim, and it deserves to be stated plainly. One of the leading theoretical physicists alive today is telling us that time, the most intimate and inescapable feature of your daily experience, is something like a mirage. It is real in the sense that you experience it, but it is not real in the sense that it exists independently of your experience. Take away the observer, and the flow of time dissolves. But if time does not exist at the fundamental level, why do we experience it so vividly? Why does the arrow of time, the sense that the past is fixed and the future is open, that eggs break but never unbreak, that we remember yesterday but not tomorrow, feel so absolutely real? This is where thermodynamics enters the story, and it enters with devastating force. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy, the measure of disorder or randomness in a system, tends to increase in isolated systems. Drop an egg onto a stone floor, and it shatters into 1,000 fragments. You will never, in the entire remaining lifetime of the universe, see those fragments spontaneously reassemble into an intact egg. Pour cream into black coffee and watch the white tendrils dissolve into uniform brown. You will never see the cream and coffee spontaneously separate. Burn a log in a fireplace and watch it crumble into ash. You will never see ash spontaneously reconstitute into a log. This one-directionality, this relentless march from order to disorder, is what gives time its arrow. The past is the direction of lower entropy. The future is the direction of higher entropy. And the constant, irreversible increase of entropy is what creates the sensation that time has a direction, that it is going somewhere, that it flows. But here is where the puzzle becomes truly deep. The fundamental laws of physics, the equations that govern every particle, every field, every force in the universe, are time reversible. Every single one of them works equally well, whether time runs forward or backward. If you filmed a single collision between two particles and played the film in reverse, no physicist could tell you which direction was correct. Both are equally valid according to the fundamental laws. There is nothing in the equations of motion, not Newton's laws, not Maxwell's equations, not the Schrödinger equation, not the standard model Lagrangian that picks out a preferred direction of time. So where does the arrow come from? If the laws do not care which direction time runs, why does the universe so clearly prefer one direction over the other? The Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann proposed an answer in the late 19th century that remains the best explanation we have, and it is profoundly unsettling. The arrow of time, Boltzmann argued, is not a property of the laws of physics. It is a property of initial conditions. The universe happened to begin in a state of extraordinarily low entropy, an almost impossibly ordered configuration. A hot, dense, smooth plasma compressed into an unimaginably small volume. From that improbable beginning, entropy has been increasing ever since. The arrow of time is not built into the laws, it is built into the starting point. Change the starting point, and you change the arrow. Consider what Boltzmann's insight truly implies. Every memory you have, every recollection of childhood, every image of yesterday's breakfast, every feeling of nostalgia is not a recording of the past. It is a physical configuration of neurons in your brain right now, in this moment. And the reason you have memories of the past but not of the future is not because the past is ontologically different from the future. It is because the past had lower entropy. Memory formation is itself an entropic process your brain creates, ordered records of experience, and ordered records can only form in the direction of increasing entropy. If the entropy gradient were reversed, you would remember the future and forget the past. The very structure of memory, the thing that makes you feel like time has a direction, is not evidence that time truly flows. It is evidence that entropy is increasing. Nothing more. This realization cuts deep. It means that your entire sense of personal history, the narrative of your life, the feeling that you have come from somewhere and are going somewhere, may be an artifact of thermodynamics rather than a reflection of temporal reality. But this answer only generates a deeper question that Boltzmann himself could not resolve. Why did the universe begin in such a low entropy state? What set those initial conditions? And if the arrow of time is merely a consequence of how the universe started rather than a fundamental law, does that mean the arrow is contingent? Could it have pointed the other way? The British mathematician and physicist Roger Penrose has called this the deepest mystery in cosmology. He calls it the Weyl curvature hypothesis, the observation that at the Big Bang, the gravitational degrees of freedom were almost perfectly smooth and uniform, producing an initial state of astonishingly low gravitational entropy. This smoothness, Penrose argues, is what seeded the arrow of time. Everything we experience as temporal flow, the aging of our bodies, the fading of memories, the forward march of history traces back to this single, unexplained fact about the beginning of the universe. Why the beginning was so ordered, Penrose freely admits, is a question that current physics cannot answer. So let us take stock of where the physics has brought us. Einstein showed that time is relative. It flows at different rates depending on speed and gravity, and the distinction between past, present, and future may be an illusion. The block universe interpretation reveals a reality in which all moments exist simultaneously and nothing truly flows. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation shows that at the deepest quantum level, the entire universe may be fundamentally timeless, a frozen totality with no before and no after. And thermodynamics shows us that the arrow of time may not be a law at all, but an accident of initial conditions that remain unexplained. Time, it seems, is not what we think it is. It may not flow, it may not be fundamental, it may not even exist in the way we imagine. And yet you feel it. Right now, in this very moment, you feel the weight of time pressing forward. You feel the past receding behind you. You feel the future approaching. You feel the urgency of this present instant, the sense that if you do not act now, the moment will be lost. This sensation is as vivid and as undeniable as anything in your entire experience. So if the physics is telling us time is an illusion, the question becomes unavoidable. Who is generating the illusion? Where is it coming from? This is where the story takes its most fascinating turn. Because if time is not a property of the external universe, if it does not appear in the fundamental equations of physics, then the only place left for it to exist is inside you, inside your mind, inside the architecture of your consciousness. And this is not merely a philosophical suggestion. There is growing scientific evidence that your brain actively constructs the experience of time, that it manufactures the sensation of now, engineers the feeling of duration, and creates the arrow from past to future as a survival mechanism. The passage of time may not be something you passively observe in the world around you. It may be something your consciousness actively builds, moment by moment, for reasons that go to the very heart of what it means to be alive. But before we explore how the brain constructs time, before we enter the neuroscience laboratory and examine the extraordinary mechanisms that create your sense of temporal flow, consider something that should stop you in your tracks. The conclusion that modern physics is approaching, that time is a construction, that the present moment is manufactured, that the timeless is more fundamental than the temporal, is not new. It is, in fact, ancient. In the 4th century, Augustine of Hippo, one of the most penetrating intellects in the history of Western thought, asked a deceptively simple question in his Confessions. What is time? His answer remains one of the most remarkable passages in all of philosophy. The past, Augustine reasoned, no longer exists. The future does not yet exist, and the present is a knife edge with no duration. The instant you try to grasp it, it has already become the past. So if the past does not exist, and the future does not exist, and the present has no duration, then where does time exist? Augustine's answer: nowhere but in the mind. Time, he argued, is a distension of the soul, a stretching of consciousness across 3 activities: memory, which makes the past present; attention, which makes the present present; and expectation, which makes the future present. Without a mind to perform these operations, time has no reality whatsoever. Think about what Augustine is describing. He is not making a casual observation about subjective experience. He is performing a rigorous logical analysis and arriving at a conclusion that mirrors the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. Time has no existence, independent of the mind that perceives it. 16 centuries before quantum gravity, a North African theologian sat in his study and reached, through pure reasoning, a conclusion that theoretical physics would only formalize in the 20th century. And half a world away, in an entirely separate intellectual tradition, Buddhist contemplatives were arriving at a parallel insight through the practice of sustained meditative attention. The Buddha taught that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, that nothing endures unchanged for even a single moment. But embedded within this teaching was a subtler and more radical observation. When contemplatives examined the present moment with the precision that deep meditation allows, they found that it dissolved under scrutiny. The Buddhist concept of ksana, the smallest conceivable unit of time, was analyzed by generations of Abhidharma scholars until they reached a conclusion that echoes across the centuries into modern physics. The present moment has no inherent existence. It is not something you find in reality. It is something you construct through the act of perception itself. The Buddhist tradition did not stop at theoretical analysis. Contemplative practitioners reported direct experiences of temporal dissolution states in which the ordinary sense of sequential time collapses and is replaced by something they described as an eternal present. These were not vague, mystical feelings. They were specific, reproducible states of consciousness, achieved through rigorous meditative technique, in which the constructed nature of temporal experience became directly perceptible. Modern neuroscience is only now beginning to investigate what happens in the brain during these states, and what it is finding is remarkable. But that is a story for what comes next. The parallels are extraordinary. Physics says time does not appear in the fundamental equations. Augustine says time exists only in the distension of the mind. Buddhism says the present moment is empty of inherent existence. 3 traditions, separated by centuries, by continents, by methodology, mathematical proof, philosophical reasoning, contemplative practice, and yet they converge on the same unsettling possibility. The time you feel flowing through you right now may not be flowing at all. We are only at the beginning of this investigation. The physics has told us that something is profoundly wrong with our ordinary understanding of time, but the full picture, how exactly the brain constructs temporal experience, why consciousness might need the illusion of time to function, and what it means that the deepest equations of reality describe a timeless universe requires us to go much further. We are about to enter the neuroscience laboratory and ask one of the most precise and consequential questions in modern science. If time is an illusion, how does the brain build it? Because it turns out that your brain does not have a clock. It does not possess a single, unified mechanism for tracking the passage of time. Instead, it has something far more extraordinary and far more fragile than anyone expected. A distributed, multi-layered system that constructs temporal experience from scratch, moment by moment, using processes that can be disrupted, distorted, and in some extraordinary cases, dissolved entirely. And when that system breaks down, the illusion of time breaks down with it, revealing something about the relationship between consciousness and reality that no one fully understands yet. We have arrived at a question that physics alone cannot answer. The equations have told us that time may not exist at the fundamental level of reality. The block universe suggests that past, present, and future coexist as permanent features of a four-dimensional structure. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation describes a cosmos with no time variable at all, and yet you feel time flowing right now. As you hear these words, something is generating the illusion. Something is building the experience of temporal flow from a reality that may contain none. And that something is your brain. But here is what makes this story so extraordinary. Your brain does not have a clock. There is no single mechanism inside your skull that tracks the passage of time the way a wristwatch does. No oscillating crystal, no ticking pendulum, no central processor counting seconds. Instead, your brain constructs the experience of time using a distributed network of systems that are scattered across different regions, operating at different speeds, and often disagreeing with each other. The sense of now that feels so unified and seamless to you is actually a patchwork, a composite assembled from multiple independent processes, stitched together so skillfully that you never notice the seams. This discovery is one of the most remarkable findings in modern neuroscience, and it begins with a simple question: how long is now? You might think the present moment is instantaneous, a dimensionless point between past and future, but that is not how your brain experiences it. The psychologist William James, writing in 1890, coined the term specious present to describe the fact that our experience of now has duration. It is not a point. It is a window roughly 2 to 3 seconds wide, within which your brain treats incoming information as belonging to the same moment. Events that fall within this window feel simultaneous. Events that fall outside it feel sequential. They belong to the past or the future. This 2 to 3 second window has been confirmed through a variety of experiments. If you listen to a metronome clicking at a slow pace, your brain automatically groups the clicks into pairs or triplets, tick-tock, tick-tock, even though the clicks are physically identical. This grouping is not in the sound, it is in your brain, and the groups tend to last roughly 2 to 3 seconds. If you ask someone to tap a rhythm from memory, the phrases they produce tend to cluster within this same window. If you analyze the duration of poetic lines, musical phrases, and natural speech segments across dozens of languages, you find the same thing. A universal temporal window of approximately 2 to 3 seconds, within which the brain treats information as belonging to one perceptual moment. The neuroscientist Ernst Poppel, who spent decades studying this phenomenon at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, proposed that this window is the brain's fundamental unit of conscious experience, what he called the temporal integration window. Poppel argued that consciousness does not flow like a river, it pulses, like a heartbeat. Every 2 to 3 seconds, the brain closes one window of experience and opens another. What you perceive as a smooth, continuous stream of awareness is actually a rapid series of discrete moments stitched together so seamlessly that you never notice the transitions. This is already a stunning insight. The continuity of time that feels so obvious and so fundamental to your experience is itself a construction. It is not given by reality. It is manufactured by your neural architecture. And if the brain is constructing even the basic feeling of temporal continuity, then every other aspect of your temporal experience, duration, sequence, the arrow from past to future must also be constructed. This means that what you call the present moment is not an objective feature of the world. It is a temporal window manufactured by your brain. Different brains can manufacture windows of slightly different widths, and the width of the window can change depending on your state of arousal, attention, emotional intensity, and neurochemistry. The present is not something you discover in the world. It is something your brain builds for you. But the construction goes far deeper than this. In the 1980s, the neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a series of experiments that would become some of the most debated in the history of brain science. Libet asked a simple question. When you decide to move your hand, at what point does the decision occur? He placed electrodes on subjects' scalps to measure brain activity and asked them to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, while noting the position of a clock hand at the moment they felt the urge to move. The results were shocking. Libet found that the brain's electrical activity, the so-called readiness potential, began ramping up roughly 550 milliseconds before the person reported feeling the conscious urge to move. The conscious decision came about 200 milliseconds before the movement itself. This means the brain had already begun preparing the action more than a third of a second before the person was aware of deciding anything. Think about what this implies for your experience of time. The sequence of events, as you experience them first, the decision, then the action does not match the sequence as it actually occurs in your brain. Your brain initiates the process. Then, hundreds of milliseconds later, it generates the conscious feeling of having decided. Then the action occurs. The conscious experience is not directing the show. It is narrating it, after the fact, and editing the timeline to make it feel like you were in charge all along. Libet's experiments have been replicated, refined, and debated for decades. More recent work using functional MRI, conducted by John Dylan Haynes and his team at the Bernstein Center in Berlin, pushed the timeline even further. They found that the outcome of a simple decision could be predicted from brain activity up to 7 seconds before the person reported being aware of the decision. 7 seconds. During that time, the brain was processing, computing, and moving toward a conclusion, all while the person's conscious experience reported nothing happening at all. This finding does not mean that free will is an illusion. That debate is far more nuanced than popular accounts suggest. What it does mean is that your conscious experience of when things happen is unreliable. The brain's internal timeline, the sequence of first I decided, then I acted, is not a faithful record. It is a reconstruction. And like all reconstructions, it serves a purpose. The purpose is coherence. The brain needs you to feel like a unified agent moving through time, making decisions and executing them in order. Without that narrative, the sense of self, the feeling that you are a continuous person with a past and a future, would disintegrate. This connection between temporal construction and the sense of self is one of the most important discoveries in modern neuroscience. Your identity, the feeling of being you, depends critically on the brain's ability to construct a temporal narrative. You are, in a very real sense, the story your brain tells about a person moving through time. Without the story, there is no character. Without time, there is no you, at least, not the you are accustomed to. This reveals something profound about the nature of temporal experience. Your brain does not give you a real-time feed of reality. It gives you an edited, delayed and reconstructed version of events, a version in which the timing has been adjusted to create a coherent narrative. The neuroscientist David Eagleman has documented this phenomenon extensively. In his research, Eagleman has shown that the brain routinely reorders events in time, delays conscious awareness, and even retroactively inserts experiences into the past. One of Eagleman's most striking demonstrations involves what he calls temporal binding. When you press a button and a light flashes immediately afterward, your brain learns to associate the two events as cause and effect. But if Eagleman then introduces a delay between the button press and the flash, something remarkable happens when the delay is removed. The subject perceives the flash as occurring before the button press, an impossible reversal of causality. The brain had recalibrated its temporal expectations based on the delay, and when the delay disappeared, the recalibration caused the brain to perceive the future before the past. Eagleman has documented dozens of such temporal distortions. In one experiment, he showed subjects a series of images: a shoe, a shoe, a shoe, and then a face. Despite all images being displayed for exactly the same duration, subjects consistently reported that the oddball image, the face among shoes, lasted longer. The brain, encountering something unexpected, allocated more processing resources to it, and this additional processing was interpreted as additional duration. The face did not last longer in the world. It lasted longer in the brain's construction of the world. In another line of research, Eagleman and his colleagues demonstrated what they called the chronostasis illusion, the phenomenon you experience when you glance at a clock and the second hand seems to freeze for a moment before resuming its normal tick. This is not because the clock paused, it is because your brain, during the rapid eye movement that brought the clock into view, was unable to process visual information. Rather than presenting you with a gap in experience, a moment of blindness, the brain retroactively filled in the missing time by stretching the first image it received after the eye movement backward in time. It edited the past to create the illusion of continuity. The present moment you experienced was partly fabricated from the future. These findings converge on a single, inescapable conclusion. The brain is not a passive receiver of temporal information. It is an active editor, a constructor, a storyteller. It takes raw sensory data that arrives in no particular temporal order and assembles it into the smooth, flowing, directional experience of time that you call reality. Your brain is not passively recording the flow of time. It is actively editing it, rearranging it, manufacturing it. This editing becomes even more dramatic when you examine how the brain handles duration, the feeling of how long something lasts. You know from daily experience that time seems to speed up when you are engaged and slow down when you are bored. An hour at a party flies by, an hour in a waiting room crawls. But this is not merely a subjective impression. The brain is using fundamentally different mechanisms to assess duration in these two cases. Neuroscientists have identified at least two distinct systems that the brain uses to track time. The first is an explicit timing system, mediated largely by the basal ganglia and the supplementary motor area, which handles intervals in the range of milliseconds to seconds. This system is closely linked to dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward, motivation, and attention. When dopamine levels are high, this internal clock ticks faster, and time feels like it is passing more quickly. When dopamine levels are low, the clock slows down and time drags. This is why stimulant drugs, which flood the brain with dopamine, make time seem to accelerate, while depressant drugs make time seem to crawl. This is why fever distorts time perception. Elevated body temperature increases the firing rate of dopamine neurons, making the internal clock tick faster and causing time to feel like it is rushing past. It is why patients with Parkinson's disease who have depleted dopamine systems consistently underestimate the passage of time. Their internal clocks are running slow. And it is why recreational drugs that affect the dopamine system, from amphetamines to cannabis to psychedelics, produce such dramatic distortions in temporal experience. The drug is not changing time, it is changing the clock. And because the clock is all you have, changing the clock changes your entire experience of reality. The second system is a retrospective duration system, which estimates how long something lasted after the fact, based on the density of memories formed during that period. When you experience something novel, emotionally intense, or richly detailed, your brain forms more memories per unit of time. When you later recall that experience, the higher density of memories makes the brain estimate that more time must have passed. This is why a vacation in a new country feels long while you are living it, because everything is novel and your brain is recording furiously, but feels like it went by quickly when you look back on it from the routine of home. Conversely, a boring, routine week feels slow in the moment, but seems to have vanished when you recall it, because few distinctive memories were formed. These two systems can contradict each other. Time can feel slow in the moment and fast in retrospect, or fast in the moment and slow in retrospect. Your brain is running two different clocks, using two different methods, and the results do not always agree. The unified sense of temporal flow that you experience is a negotiated compromise between systems that are, at a fundamental level, measuring different things. And it gets stranger still. In moments of extreme danger or fear, many people report that time seems to slow down dramatically. Car crash survivors describe seeing every detail of the impact in what feels like slow motion. Soldiers in combat report that bullets seem to hang in the air. Skydivers on their first jump report that the fall seems to last far longer than it actually does. For decades, scientists assumed that the brain was actually speeding up its processing during these moments, that adrenaline was somehow accelerating the neural clock, allowing more information to be captured per second. Eagleman tested this directly. He had volunteers fall backward from a 150-foot tower into a net, a genuinely terrifying experience, while wearing a device on their wrist that flashed numbers at a speed just too fast to read under normal conditions. If the brain were truly speeding up during fear, the volunteers should have been able to read the numbers during the fall. They could not. Time was not actually slowing down. The brain was not processing more information per second. Instead, what was happening was that the amygdala, the brain's fear center, was commanding a second, parallel memory writing system to record the experience in extraordinary detail. When the volunteers later recalled the fall, the abnormally dense memory trace made their brains estimate that the event had lasted much longer than it actually had. The slow motion feeling was a retrospective illusion, a trick of memory, not of perception. This finding resolved a decades-old mystery, but it also opened an even deeper one. If our most vivid temporal experiences, the moments that feel the most real, the most stretched out, the most significant, are actually memory illusions, then how much of our ordinary temporal experience is also illusory? When you recall a childhood summer that seemed to last forever, that feeling of extended duration is not a measurement of the time that actually passed. It is a reflection of how many memories your young, novelty-saturated brain was recording. When you feel that the years are speeding up as you age, that feeling is not because time is objectively accelerating. It is because your brain, habituated to routine, is recording fewer distinctive memories per unit of time. The fabric of your temporal experience, the feeling that your life has a certain length, a certain pace, a certain rhythm, is woven entirely from memory density. Change the density, and you change the experience. This means something remarkable. Your sense of how long your life has been, whether it feels like it has been long or short, fast or slow, is not a property of time. It is a property of your brain's recording habits. A person who lives every day with intense novelty and attention will experience a subjectively longer life than a person who spends decades in repetitive routine, even if both live to exactly the same age. The brain does not measure time. It measures experience, and then it calls that measurement time. Your brain is not experiencing a slowed down present. It is constructing a stretched out past. This has extraordinary implications. It means that your sense of how long something lasted is not a measurement of objective time. It is a story your brain tells itself based on how much information it recorded. The more it recorded, the longer it feels like the event lasted. The less it recorded, the shorter. Duration, like the present moment itself, is a construction, an interpretation, a narrative. Now, here is where this becomes directly relevant to what the physicists told us. Remember Rovelli's claim that time is not fundamental, that it is an emergent phenomenon, arising from the interaction between complex systems and their environment. The neuroscience is showing us exactly what that emergence looks like from the inside. Your brain takes a timeless stream of sensory data and imposes temporal structure on it, a beginning, a middle, an end, a before, an after, a now. It creates the arrow. It manufactures duration. It edits the sequence. Without the brain performing these operations, the raw data of experience would be just that raw data. No flow, no passage, no past receding or future approaching. You are not experiencing time, you are generating it. Consider the implications of this for the deepest questions in physics. If the Wheeler-DeWitt equation is correct, if the universe at its most fundamental level is timeless, then the emergence of time is not just a philosophical puzzle, it is a neuroscience puzzle. The brain is the mechanism by which a timeless universe becomes a temporal experience. The brain is the bridge between the physics and the feeling. And understanding how that bridge works is not just a question about brains, it is a question about the nature of reality itself. Because if consciousness is what generates time, then consciousness is not merely something that exists within time. It is the reason time exists at all, at least, the kind of time you know. And this is where the contemplative traditions enter the story again, not as ancient curiosities, but as experimental traditions that mapped this territory long before neuroscience had the tools to confirm what they found. In the Buddhist meditation tradition, one of the most advanced practices is called Vipassana insight meditation. The practitioner sits in stillness and observes the raw flow of sensory experience with sustained microscopic attention. What meditators consistently report across centuries and across cultures is that when attention becomes sufficiently refined, the apparent continuity of experience begins to break apart. What seemed like a smooth, continuous flow of consciousness reveals itself as a series of discrete, momentary events arising and passing away with extraordinary rapidity. The Buddhist term for this is anicca, impermanence, and the direct perception of it is considered one of the hallmarks of genuine insight. Modern neuroscience has begun to investigate these claims with striking results. A study published in the journal PLOS One by researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison examined experienced Tibetan Buddhist meditators using electroencephalography. They found that long-term meditators showed significantly altered temporal processing their brains, handled the sequencing and binding of moments differently from non-meditators. The meditators' brains appeared to process temporal information in a way that was less automatic, less constructed, and more granular, as if the meditation practice had loosened the brain's grip on its own temporal construction, allowing the practitioner to perceive the raw, unconstructed building blocks of experience. Other research, conducted at institutions including Yale, Harvard, and the Max Planck Institute, has found that meditation practice alters activity in the brain's default mode network, the network associated with mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and, critically, the sense of autobiographical time. When the default mode network is active, you are thinking about your past, planning your future, and constructing the narrative of your life. When it quiets down as it does during deep meditation, the sense of temporal flow becomes less rigid. Meditators frequently report experiences that neuroscientists are only now learning to characterize, states in which the boundary between past, present, and future becomes fluid or dissolves entirely, replaced by something that practitioners describe as timeless awareness. The neuroscientist Andrew Newberg, working at Thomas Jefferson University, has conducted brain imaging studies on practitioners from multiple contemplative traditions: Franciscan nuns in deep prayer, Tibetan Buddhist monks in meditation, Sufi practitioners in dhikr. Across all traditions, Newberg found a consistent pattern. During peak contemplative states, activity decreased dramatically in the posterior superior parietal lobe, a brain region responsible for orienting the self in space and time. When this region quiets, the practitioner's sense of spatial and temporal boundaries dissolves. The meditating monk does not know where his body ends and the room begins. The praying nun loses track of whether minutes or hours have passed. The boundaries that the brain normally constructs between self and other, between now and then, become transparent. Newberg calls this absolute unitary being, a state in which the brain's boundary-making machinery temporarily suspends operation, and the result is an experience of boundless, timeless awareness that practitioners across every tradition describe as the most real thing they have ever experienced. This is not a malfunction. This is what consciousness looks like when the temporal construction is removed. This is not a vague mystical state. It is a specific, reproducible alteration in neural processing that corresponds to a measurable change in how the brain constructs temporal experience. And it is not unique to Buddhism. In the Islamic contemplative tradition, the concept of waqt, the mystical present, plays a central role in Sufi practice. The great Sufi teacher Ibn Arabi wrote extensively about how the experience of time changes during states of deep spiritual absorption. During hal, a transient state of spiritual illumination, the practitioner's experience of time collapses. Hours may feel like seconds. The sequential ordering of past, present, and future loses its grip, and what replaces it is not disorientation but a heightened clarity, a perception of reality that is, paradoxically, more vivid and more immediate, precisely because the filtering mechanism of temporal construction has been temporarily suspended. The Quran itself contains passages that point to the constructed nature of temporal experience. Surah Al-Ma'arij describes a day in the sight of God as equivalent to 50,000 years as humans count. Surah Al-Hajj gives a different ratio. One day with God equals 1,000 human years. These are not contradictions. They are poetic descriptions of a reality that Einstein's equations would later formalize, that time is relative, that duration depends on the frame of reference, and that the way we experience time is not the way time necessarily is. In the Christian mystical tradition, a parallel phenomenon is described with remarkable consistency. The 14th century anonymous English text, The Cloud of Unknowing, instructs the contemplative to let go of all concepts, including the concept of time, in order to approach God directly. The Spanish mystic Teresa of Avila described states of spiritual marriage in which the ordinary experience of time was completely transcended, replaced by what she called an abiding sense of God's eternal presence. And the medieval German mystic Meister Eckhart wrote, "Time is what keeps the light from reaching us. There is no greater obstacle to God than time." In the Hindu tradition, the concept of kala time is explicitly described as a power of Maya, the cosmic illusion that veils the true nature of reality. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali describe advanced meditative states called samadhi, in which the practitioner transcends temporal experience entirely, entering what the texts call kala vimukta, freedom from time. This is not described as unconsciousness or blankness. It is described as the highest form of awareness consciousness freed from the constraints that temporal construction normally imposes. What is extraordinary is that these contemplative reports from Buddhist monasteries, Sufi lodges, Christian hermitages, and Hindu ashrams converge on the same phenomenological description. When the ordinary mechanisms of temporal construction are suspended, what remains is not chaos, it is not confusion. It is a mode of awareness that practitioners across every major tradition describe as more real, not less, more clear, not less. As if the removal of the temporal filter reveals something about consciousness itself that the filter normally conceals. The neuroscience and the contemplative traditions are pointing in the same direction. The brain constructs time. It builds the present moment from raw sensory data. It manufactures duration from memory density. It creates the arrow of time from the asymmetry of entropic processes. And when these construction mechanisms are altered, whether by brain injury, by pharmacological intervention, or by disciplined contemplative practice, the illusion of temporal flow breaks down and something else becomes visible. But what is that something else? What would it be like to experience reality without the temporal filter? And why would the brain go to such extraordinary lengths to build the illusion in the first place? This is the question that takes us to the heart of the matter, because the brain did not evolve to show you the truth about reality. It evolved to keep you alive. And if constructing the illusion of time is necessary for survival, if without it, consciousness would be overwhelmed by the raw, unstructured totality of a timeless universe, then the illusion is not a flaw. It is the most important thing your brain does. The next stage of this investigation will take us to the edge of that question. We will ask what happens to consciousness when the temporal construction fails completely in neurological conditions, in near-death experiences, in states of extreme meditation. And we will ask the deepest question of all: if the brain builds time to protect consciousness from chaos, what is the chaos it is protecting you from? What does a timeless universe look like from the inside? The answer, as we will see, may explain why every major spiritual tradition in human history has placed such extraordinary importance on the concept of eternity. We have now seen the evidence from two directions. The physicists have told us that time may not exist at the fundamental level of reality. The neuroscientists have shown us that the brain actively constructs every aspect of temporal experience: the present moment, the sense of duration, the arrow from past to future, even the feeling that you are a continuous person moving through time. But this raises a question that neither physics nor neuroscience has fully answered, and it may be the most important question of all. Why? Why would the brain go to such extraordinary lengths to construct an illusion this elaborate? Evolution does not waste energy. The human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's total energy budget, despite comprising only 2% of its mass. Every neural operation has a metabolic cost. If the brain is dedicating significant resources to constructing the experience of temporal flow, manufacturing a present moment, editing sequences, creating an arrow of time, then this construction must serve a critical survival function. The illusion of time is not a bug. It is not a byproduct of neural complexity. It is, almost certainly, one of the most important things the brain does. And the reason may be that without it, consciousness would be destroyed. To understand why, we need to think carefully about what a timeless universe would look like from the inside, from the perspective of a conscious being trying to navigate it. Imagine, for a moment, that you could perceive reality the way the Wheeler-DeWitt equation describes it. No before, no after, no sequence. Every event that has ever occurred or will ever occur, present simultaneously. Every possible sensory input arriving at once. The light from every star, the sound of every voice, the sensation of every touch you have ever felt or will ever feel. Not spread out along a timeline, but compressed into a single undifferentiated totality. This is not a hypothetical abstraction. This is what reality may actually be like at the fundamental level, a timeless, changeless block of information containing everything. And if a conscious mind were exposed to this totality without any filtering mechanism, the result would not be omniscience. The result would be noise. Total, overwhelming, undifferentiated noise. Every signal drowned by every other signal. Every pattern obliterated by the sheer volume of simultaneous data. Consciousness would not expand, it would collapse. This is the chaos problem, and it is, in a sense, the deepest problem in the philosophy of mind. The mathematician and physicist Roger Penrose has thought about this problem more carefully than almost anyone alive. In his books The Emperor's New Mind and Shadows of the Mind, Penrose argues that consciousness cannot be reduced to computation, that there is something about awareness that transcends what any algorithm can produce. But embedded within his argument is a crucial insight about the relationship between consciousness and information. Penrose points out that consciousness is not the ability to process all information. It is the ability to select relevant information from an ocean of irrelevance. Awareness, in Penrose's framework, is fundamentally an act of filtering, of choosing what to attend to and what to ignore, of carving a narrow, manageable stream from an infinite flood. And this is exactly what the construction of time does. By imposing a sequential structure on reality, by breaking the timeless totality into discrete moments that arrive one at a time, in order the brain transforms an unmanageable infinity into a navigable stream. Instead of receiving all information at once, you receive it piece by piece, moment by moment, in a sequence that allows you to process, respond, and act. The construction of time is not a distortion of reality. It is a compression algorithm. It is the mechanism by which infinite information is reduced to finite experience. Think of it this way. A library contains millions of books, all of which exist simultaneously, but you cannot read them all at once. You must select one book, open it to one page, and read one sentence at a time, in sequence. The sequential reading is not a property of the library, it is a property of the reader. The library exists all at once. The reading happens in time. And without the sequential structure of reading, the library would be useless, an overwhelming mass of information with no point of entry. The brain, in constructing time, is doing something analogous. It is taking a universe that may exist all at once, a cosmic library of infinite, simultaneous information, and reading it one moment at a time. The flow of time is not the universe moving, it is consciousness reading. The physicist Jacob Bekenstein, building on the work of Stephen Hawking, demonstrated something remarkable about the relationship between information and physics. He showed that the maximum amount of information that can be contained in any region of space is not proportional to the volume of that region, as you might expect, but to the surface area of its boundary. This is known as the Bekenstein bound, and it implies that the universe has a finite information capacity. But even a finite information capacity, when it encompasses the entire cosmos, is staggeringly, incomprehensibly vast. A single cubic centimeter of space, at the Planck scale, contains more potential information states than there are atoms in the observable universe. No biological brain could process this. No neural architecture, no matter how sophisticated, could simultaneously integrate the full informational content of even a tiny region of fundamental reality. The brain must compress, it must filter, it must select, and the most powerful compression tool at its disposal is time, the conversion of simultaneous totality into sequential experience. By spreading information across a temporal dimension, the brain reduces the processing load at any given moment to something manageable. Instead of confronting infinity all at once, consciousness encounters it one carefully curated slice at a time. This is not merely an analogy, The neuroscientist Carl has developed a mathematical framework called the free energy principle, which describes the brain as a prediction machine whose fundamental imperative is to minimize surprise, to reduce the gap between what it expects and what it encounters. Friston's framework shows that temporal prediction is the brain's primary strategy for managing informational complexity. By predicting what comes next, the brain can prepare for incoming information before it arrives, dramatically reducing the processing burden. The experience of time flowing forward is, in Friston's framework, the subjective side of this predictive process. You feel time moving because your brain is constantly generating predictions about the immediate future and comparing them to incoming data. The arrow of time, in this view, is not a property of the universe. It is a property of prediction, and prediction is what keeps the brain from being overwhelmed. The neuroscientist Giulio Tononi has developed this idea into one of the most rigorous theories of consciousness ever proposed. His theory, called Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, begins with a mathematical framework for measuring consciousness. Tononi defines consciousness as integrated information, the amount of information a system generates as a unified whole, above and beyond what its individual parts generate separately. He assigns this a numerical value called phi. The higher the phi, the more conscious the system. But here is what makes IIT directly relevant to our question about time. Tononi's mathematics reveals that for a system to have high phi, for it to be genuinely conscious, it must integrate information across time as well as across space. A conscious system does not just combine information from different brain regions in the present moment. It combines information from the past and the present, weaving them together into a unified experience. Memory and perception are not separate operations. They are aspects of a single integrative process, and that process inherently requires a temporal dimension. This connects to one of the oldest problems in neuroscience, the binding problem. How does the brain combine information from different sensory modalities, sight, sound, touch, smell, into a single, unified experience? The visual cortex processes color. A different region processes motion. Another processes shape. Sound is handled by the auditory cortex. Touch by the somatosensory cortex. These regions operate at different speeds and with different latencies. Visual processing takes longer than auditory processing. Touch signals from your feet take longer to reach the brain than touch signals from your face, and yet your experience is unified. You see and hear and feel a single world happening at a single time, in a single present moment. The temporal construction of the brain is what makes this unification possible. The brain actively delays faster signals and accelerates the processing of slower ones, synchronizing everything into a single temporal window, the specious present we discussed earlier. It waits for the slowest relevant signal to arrive and then presents the entire package to consciousness as a unified now. This means the present moment you experience is always slightly in the past your brain needs. Time to collect, synchronize, and integrate all the information before it can present a coherent snapshot. The price of unity is delay. The price of a seamless present is that the present is never truly present. The philosopher Daniel Dennett has called this process the multiple drafts model of consciousness. There is no single moment at which experience becomes conscious, Dennett argues. Instead, multiple parallel processes generate multiple drafts of experience, which are constantly being revised, edited, and integrated. What you call now is just the most recent stable draft, a temporarily settled consensus among dozens of competing neural processes, each operating on its own timeline. In other words, consciousness, as Tononi defines it, cannot exist in an instant. It requires duration. It requires a before and an after, a past that informs the present, a present that anticipates the future, The very mathematics of consciousness demands the existence of time, or at least demands the existence of something that functions as time within the conscious system. This is a profound result. It suggests that the brain does not construct time arbitrarily or accidentally. It constructs time because consciousness literally cannot function without it. Time is not an optional feature of awareness. It is a structural requirement. Without temporal organization, the integrated information that constitutes consciousness would dissolve into disconnected fragments, each moment isolated from every other moment, each sensation cut off from the context that gives it meaning. You would not be unconscious. You would be something worse, a shattered awareness, experiencing everything and understanding nothing. The physicist John Archibald Wheeler, the same Wheeler who co-authored the timeless Wheeler-DeWitt equation, spent the last decades of his life wrestling with the relationship between information, consciousness, and reality. He coined the phrase "it from bit" to express his conviction that the physical universe is, at its foundation, informational. Every particle, every field, every force, Wheeler argued, derives its existence from information, from the answers to yes or no questions. And the act of obtaining that information, the act of measurement, of observation, of consciousness, encountering reality, is not passive, it is constitutive. It is what brings the physical world into being. Wheeler illustrated this with what he called the participatory universe, the idea that the universe does not exist as a fully formed object, independent of observation. Instead, it is brought into existence, retroactively and continuously, by acts of observation. Every measurement, every conscious experience, every moment in which information is extracted from the quantum foam is an act of participation in the creation of reality. And if temporal structure is something that consciousness imposes through its participation, then the flow of time is not something the universe does. It is something we do to the universe. This is a radical idea, and it should be stated with appropriate caution. Wheeler himself acknowledged that the participatory universe was a conjecture, not a proven theory. But it is a conjecture that arises naturally from the mathematics of quantum mechanics, and it is taken seriously by a significant number of theoretical physicists. If it is even partially correct, then the construction of time is not merely a neural trick, it is a cosmological act. If Wheeler is right, then consciousness is not merely a spectator watching a pre-existing universe unfold. It is a participant in the creation of that universe. And the temporal structure that consciousness imposes the conversion of timeless information into sequential experience is not a distortion of reality. It is part of how reality comes to exist. This is where the physics and the neuroscience and the philosophy converge into something truly extraordinary. The universe, at its deepest level, may be a timeless block of information. Consciousness, in order to function, must impose temporal structure on that information, and the imposition of that structure is not a mere subjective overlay. It may be part of the fundamental process by which the universe becomes actual, concrete, real. Let us push this further. If the brain constructs time to protect consciousness from informational chaos, then we should be able to observe what happens when that construction fails, and we can. There are several conditions, neurological, pharmacological, and experiential, in which the brain's temporal construction breaks down. And in every case, the result is exactly what the chaos theory predicts: the dissolution of ordinary consciousness, accompanied by an experience that is simultaneously overwhelming and, paradoxically, described by those who undergo it as revealing something fundamental about reality. Consider the phenomenon of temporal lobe epilepsy. Patients with seizures originating in the temporal lobe, the region most heavily involved in memory formation and temporal processing, frequently report extraordinary experiences during their seizures. They describe time stopping, or looping, or dissolving entirely. They describe experiencing what feels like an eternity compressed into a few seconds. The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, who suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy, described his pre-seizure auras as moments of transcendent beauty, in which, all at once, the whole of life seemed to be comprehended in a single instant. He wrote that in those moments, he experienced a higher synthesis of all existence, a vision so complete and so unified that it felt like touching eternity. Dostoevsky is not an isolated case. Neurologist Wilder Penfield, during his pioneering electrical stimulation experiments on conscious patients in the 1950s, he found that stimulating certain regions of the temporal lobe could produce vivid experiences of reliving past events, not as memories recalled from a distance, but as experiences happening now, in full sensory detail, as if time had folded back on itself. Patients heard music from their childhood, felt the texture of long-forgotten fabrics, smelled cooking from decades past, all with a vividness that exceeded ordinary memory. The temporal architecture of their experience had been disrupted, and the normally rigid boundary between past and present had dissolved. More recently, neurologists have documented a condition called dissociative time distortion in patients with damage to the insular cortex, a brain region that integrates bodily sensations with conscious awareness. These patients report that time has lost its flow entirely. They can still read clocks and understand the concept of time, but the felt experience of temporal passage, the visceral sense that moments are arriving and departing, is gone. They describe existing in a kind of eternal present that is not blissful but disorienting, a present without momentum, without direction, without the forward push that normally characterizes conscious experience. Their brains have lost the ability to construct the arrow of time, and without it they are stranded in a moment that goes nowhere. These neurological cases confirm what the theory predicts. The experience of time is not a passive perception of an external reality. It is an active construction that requires specific neural machinery. When that machinery is damaged, the construction fails, and what remains is either a terrifying formlessness or, in some cases, a transcendent totality that the patient struggles to describe in ordinary language. What is happening neurologically in these episodes is that the brain's temporal construction machinery is misfiring. The sequential ordering of experience is disrupted. The boundary between past and present dissolves, and the result is not confusion, or at least not only confusion. It is an experience of totality, of everything at once, that patients consistently describe as more real than ordinary waking life. The temporal filter has been temporarily removed, and what is visible on the other side is something that ordinary consciousness is designed to shield you from. Now consider what happens when the temporal construction is disrupted pharmacologically. Psychedelic compounds, psilocybin, dimethyltryptamine, LSD, produce some of the most dramatic alterations in temporal experience ever documented. Under the influence of these substances, time can stretch, compress, loop, fragment, or disappear entirely. Minutes can feel like hours. Hours can feel like moments. Sequences can reverse. Cause and effect can become meaningless. And at high doses, many people report the complete dissolution of temporal experience, a state they describe as timeless, eternal, or outside of time altogether. Neuroscience research conducted at Imperial College London by Robin Carhart-Harris and his team has revealed what is happening in the brain during these experiences. Psychedelic compounds dramatically reduce the activity of the default mode network, the same network that, as we discussed, constructs the sense of autobiographical time and narrative self. They also disrupt the hierarchical predictive processing that the brain uses to impose temporal structure on incoming sensory data. The brain's ability to predict what comes next, its ability to maintain the arrow of time, is weakened. And when that prediction machinery breaks down, the experience of time breaks down with it. What is remarkable about the psychedelic literature is how consistently the resulting experience is described. Across cultures, across compounds, across individuals with wildly different backgrounds and beliefs, the dissolution of temporal construction produces a strikingly similar phenomenological report, an experience of infinite presence, of everything existing simultaneously, of a reality that is vaster and more complete than anything sequential consciousness can contain. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University, conducting controlled psilocybin studies, found that a majority of participants rated their experience as one of the most personally meaningful and spiritually significant events of their entire lives. Many described encountering what they could only call eternity. The Sufi master Rumi wrote about this with extraordinary directness. In his Masnavi, he describes the spiritual path as a progressive dissolution of temporal bondage, a journey from the scattered, anxious experience of clock time into what he calls the wineless intoxication of divine presence. For Rumi, the ordinary experience of time is a prison, not because time is bad, but because it is partial. It is a fragment of reality, mistaken for the whole. The mystic's task is to dissolve the temporal construction, not to escape reality, but to perceive it more completely. The Christian tradition offers a parallel framework through the concept of nunc-stans, the standing now. This phrase, used by medieval theologians, including Boethius and Thomas Aquinas, describes God's mode of existence as an eternal present that contains all time simultaneously. For Aquinas, God does not experience the past, then the present, then the future. God experiences all of time at once, in a single, undivided act of awareness. What is remarkable about this concept is how precisely it mirrors the block universe of modern physics. Replace God with fundamental reality, and nunc-stans with the four-dimensional block, and the structure is identical. A timeless totality that contains all events simultaneously, apprehended by an awareness that is itself outside of time. Boethius, writing in the 6th century while awaiting his own execution, formulated this with unforgettable clarity in his Consolation of Philosophy. He defined eternity not as an infinite stretch of time, but as the complete, simultaneous, and perfect possession of everlasting life. Eternity, for Boethius, is not time extended without end. It is the absence of temporal succession altogether. It is everything, all at once, fully present. The physicists would not formalize this insight for another 14 centuries. This is not evidence that psychedelics reveal ultimate truth. It is evidence that the brain's temporal construction is so fundamental to ordinary experience that when it is removed, the resulting state feels categorically different from anything in normal consciousness. It feels like a different kind of reality. And this feeling of encountering a reality beyond time is precisely what the contemplative traditions have been describing for millennia. In the Hindu tradition, the concept of Maya is not simply illusion in the dismissive Western sense. Maya is the creative power by which the formless becomes formed, the infinite becomes finite, the eternal becomes temporal. Time itself, Kala, is described as one of Maya's primary instruments. The Mandukya Upanishad describes 4 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya, the 4th state that underlies and transcends all the others. Turiya is described as timeless awareness, consciousness, without temporal construction, without the filtering mechanism that creates the experience of sequential flow. The Upanishad does not describe turiya as unconsciousness. It describes it as the ground of all consciousness, the awareness that exists before time begins to structure it. The Bhagavad Gita dramatizes this insight in one of the most famous scenes in world literature. When the warrior Arjuna asks the god Krishna to reveal his true form, Krishna obliges, and what Arjuna sees is terrifying. He sees all of reality at once, all beings, all times, all events, all creation, and all destruction, compressed into a single, infinite, simultaneous vision. Arjuna is overwhelmed. He begs Krishna to return to his ordinary form. He cannot withstand the totality. He needs the filter back. He needs time to return. This ancient scene reads like a poetic description of the chaos problem. Consciousness cannot withstand unfiltered reality. The temporal construction, the illusion of sequential flow, is not a limitation to be despised. It is a mercy. It is the mechanism that allows finite minds to inhabit an infinite universe without being destroyed by it. This maps with startling precision onto what neuroscience is telling us. The brain constructs temporal experience from a substrate that is itself temporally unstructured. Remove the construction, and what remains is not blankness, but awareness itself. Awareness prior to the imposition of temporal form. The Hindu sages called it turiya. The Buddhist tradition calls it rigpa, or the nature of mind. The Christian mystics called it the eternal now, and the physicists, looking at their equations, call it the timeless ground state of the universe. Are these the same thing? That is a question that science alone cannot answer. But the structural parallel is undeniable, and it deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed. There is one more piece of evidence that belongs in this picture, and it comes from one of the most controversial areas of consciousness research: near-death experiences. Regardless of one's beliefs about their ultimate nature, near-death experiences consistently include a cluster of features that are directly relevant to the neuroscience of time. Patients who have been resuscitated from cardiac arrest frequently report that time stopped, that they experience their entire life simultaneously in what is often called a life review, and that the reality they encountered during the experience felt more real and more vivid than ordinary waking life. The cardiologist Pim van Lommel, who conducted one of the largest prospective studies of near-death experiences in cardiac arrest patients, published in The Lancet, documented these temporal anomalies in detail. Patients described experiencing complex, coherent, richly detailed perceptual experiences during periods when their brains showed no measurable electrical activity. The experiences included the collapse of temporal ordering, the perception of simultaneous totality, and a quality of hyperreality that patients insisted was categorically different from dreaming or hallucination. Penrose himself, working with the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, has proposed a speculative but influential theory that consciousness arises from quantum processes occurring inside structures called microtubules within neurons. If this theory, known as orchestrated objective reduction, or OR, is correct, then consciousness may have a direct connection to the quantum level of reality where, as the Wheeler-DeWitt equation tells us, time does not exist. The dissolution of temporal experience during near-death states, meditation, and psychedelic experiences might not be a malfunction. It might be consciousness briefly accessing its own quantum foundation, a level of reality that is, by the deepest equations of physics, genuinely timeless. This remains speculative. The OR theory is hotly debated, and many neuroscientists consider it unlikely, but the structural question it raises is important regardless of whether the specific mechanism is correct. Is there a level of reality at which consciousness exists prior to time? And if so, is the temporal world we inhabit a projection from that deeper level, a constructed interface between timeless awareness and the finite demands of biological survival? Whether these experiences represent genuine perception of a reality beyond the brain or are produced by residual neural activity during the dying process is an open scientific question. What is not in question is the phenomenology. When the brain's temporal construction machinery is disrupted at the deepest possible level during the approach of death itself, the result is an experience of timelessness that matches With remarkable consistency, the descriptions provided by contemplative traditions spanning thousands of years, the pattern is now clear. Disrupt the brain's temporal construction through epilepsy, through psychedelics, through deep meditation, through the approach of death, and the same thing happens. The sequential ordering of experience dissolves. The arrow of time loses its grip, and what emerges is an experience of reality that is timeless, total, and described by virtually everyone who encounters it as more real than the ordinary experience it replaced. This brings us to the edge of the deepest question. If the brain constructs time to protect consciousness from the overwhelming totality of a timeless universe, and if disrupting that construction reveals an experience that is consistently described as more real than ordinary reality, then what is the relationship between the illusion and the truth? Is time a necessary compromise, a reduction of infinite reality to finite experience that allows a biological organism to function? Is the temporal world we inhabit a kind of operating system, a user interface that simplifies the overwhelming complexity of what actually exists? And if so, what does that mean for consciousness itself? Is awareness something that exists within time, as we normally assume? Or is awareness the timeless ground from which the experience of time is generated? The final stage of this investigation will attempt to answer these questions. We will bring together everything: the physics of timelessness, the neuroscience of temporal construction, the chaos problem that makes the illusion necessary, and the testimony of the contemplative traditions into a single, coherent picture. And we will ask the question that every tradition, in its own way, has been asking: what are you, if not a being, in time? What is consciousness, if time is its creation, rather than its container? The answer may be the most ancient and the most modern idea in the history of human thought. We have traveled an extraordinary distance. We began with Einstein and the discovery that time is relative, that it flows at different rates depending on speed and gravity, and that the distinction between past, present, and future may be, as Einstein himself said, a stubbornly persistent illusion. We followed the trail into quantum gravity, where the Wheeler-DeWitt equation revealed a universe with no time variable at all, a frozen, timeless totality described by mathematics that contains no before and no after. We entered the neuroscience laboratory and discovered that the brain does not passively record the flow of time, but actively constructs it, manufacturing the present moment, editing the sequence of events, creating the arrow from past to future using mechanisms that can be disrupted, distorted, and dissolved. And we confronted the chaos problem, the possibility that the brain builds the illusion of time not as an error but as a necessity, because without it, consciousness would be overwhelmed by the infinite informational content of a timeless reality. Now we must bring all of this together, and when we do, what emerges is not just a scientific picture. It is a picture that resonates, with startling precision, with the deepest insights of the world's contemplative traditions, traditions that arrived at similar conclusions through entirely different methods, centuries or millennia before modern physics existed. Let us begin with what the science has established, as clearly and as honestly as we can state it. At the level of fundamental physics, there are strong reasons to believe that time as we experience it does not exist. The equations of relativity treat past, present, and future as equivalent dimensions of a single four-dimensional structure. The most successful attempts to unify quantum mechanics and gravity produce equations in which time is absent. The arrow of time, the feeling that the past is fixed and the future is open, appears to be a consequence of initial conditions rather than a fundamental law. And the leading theoretical frameworks for understanding the emergence of time, from Rovelli's thermal time hypothesis to Friston's predictive processing to Tononi's integrated information theory, all point in the same direction. Time is something that arises from the interaction between conscious systems and the deeper reality they inhabit. It is not a property of the universe. It is a property of the way minds engage with the universe. At the level of neuroscience, the evidence is equally clear. The brain constructs every aspect of temporal experience using specific, identifiable neural mechanisms. The present moment is a temporal window manufactured by integration processes in the cortex. The feeling of duration is a retrospective estimate based on memory density. The arrow of time is a byproduct of the brain's predictive machinery. The sense of being a continuous self moving through time is a narrative constructed by the default mode network. And when any of these mechanisms are disrupted by brain injury, by pharmacological intervention, by the systematic training of contemplative practice, the experience of time changes in ways that are consistent, reproducible, and often described as revelatory. This is where we stand scientifically. Time, as you experience it, is a construction. The question is what this means. There are, broadly speaking, two ways to interpret these findings. The first is deflationary. Time is an illusion. Full stop. The brain constructs it for survival purposes. The construction does not correspond to anything real, and the correct response is to note this as an interesting fact about neuroscience and move on. On this view, the experience of timelessness that meditators, mystics, and near-death experiencers report is simply another brain state interesting, perhaps, but no more revealing of ultimate reality than a dream or a hallucination. The second interpretation is deeper, and it is the one that the convergence of physics, neuroscience, and contemplative testimony invites us to take seriously. On this view, the construction of time is not a fabrication from nothing. It is a filtering of something, a reduction of a vaster reality to a manageable stream. The timeless ground state that the equations describe is not an abstraction. It is what is actually there, and the experience of timelessness that arises when the brain's temporal construction is suspended is not a malfunction. It is a glimpse of the unfiltered real. This second interpretation cannot be proven by current science, but it is consistent with the science, and it is supported by a convergence of evidence from traditions that have been investigating consciousness for far longer than Western science has existed. Consider the weight of this convergence. It is not a case of one physicist making a suggestive comment and one mystic saying something vaguely similar. It is a pattern that repeats across every major intellectual tradition in human history, independently and consistently. Mathematical physics arrives at timelessness through equations. Contemplative practice arrives at timelessness through disciplined attention. Neuroscience arrives at the construction of time through brain imaging and lesion studies. Philosophy arrives at the dependent nature of time through logical analysis. And the phenomenological reports from all of these domains describe the same structure: a timeless ground, a temporal construction, and the possibility of perceiving the ground directly when the construction is suspended. The probability that this convergence is coincidental decreases with every additional tradition that arrives at the same place through independent methods. Let us now examine what those traditions actually say, not as quaint historical curiosities, but as sophisticated frameworks that map onto the scientific picture with extraordinary precision. Christianity, at its theological core, makes a claim about God's relationship to time that is as radical as anything in modern physics. The God of Christian theology does not exist in time. God is eternal. And eternity, as the great theologians have been careful to specify, is not an infinite amount of time. It is the complete absence of temporal succession. When Boethius defined eternity as the complete, simultaneous, and perfect possession of everlasting life, he was describing something structurally identical to the block universe, a reality in which all moments coexist, in which nothing flows, in which the distinction between past, present, and future does not apply. The Gospel of John opens with a statement that has been analysed for 2,000 years and that acquires new resonance in light of what we have discovered. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Greek term translated as word is logos, a concept that in Greek philosophy meant not just speech, but the rational principle underlying all of reality. The informational structure of the cosmos. In the beginning was the logos. In the beginning was the informational structure. Before time, before matter, before the physical universe, there was information. There was pattern. There was, in Wheeler's language, bit. This is not to claim that John was doing physics. It is to observe that the deepest Christian claims about the nature of divine reality, that God exists outside of time, that the foundation of reality is logos rather than matter, that eternity is not endless duration, but the transcendence of duration are structurally compatible with what modern physics is discovering about the nature of time and information. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians, described a mystical experience in which he was caught up to the third heaven and heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. What is striking about this account is not just its content, but its temporal framing. Paul says he does not know whether the experience happened in the body or out of the body. The ordinary coordinates of physical existence, spatial location, temporal sequence, embodiment had dissolved. This is precisely the phenomenological signature of states in which the brain's temporal and spatial construction mechanisms have been disrupted. Paul's experience, whatever its ultimate cause, has the neural fingerprint of a state in which the default mode network and the posterior parietal cortex, the regions responsible for self-location in space and time, have gone quiet. The Book of Revelation, the final text of the Christian Bible, is saturated with temporal paradox. The Lamb is described as slain from the foundation of the world, an event that, in ordinary temporal logic, lies in the future, described as having occurred before the beginning of time. This is not confused writing. It is writing from within a framework in which the distinction between past, present, and future has been transcended, a framework that the block universe model would recognize immediately. In the timeless block, the crucifixion is not an event that happened 2,000 years ago. It is a permanent feature of the four-dimensional structure of reality, as present now as it was then, as present at the foundation of the world as at the end of history. The Christian mystics experienced this compatibility directly. When Meister Eckhart wrote that time is what keeps the light from reaching us, and that there is no greater obstacle to God than time, he was describing, in the language of 13th century theology, exactly what the neuroscience of temporal construction predicts. The brain's temporal filter, the mechanism that converts timeless reality into sequential experience, is precisely what prevents consciousness from perceiving the unfiltered totality. Remove the filter, and the light gets through. Remove time, and eternity becomes visible. Eckhart went further. He described a state he called the eternal now, a mode of awareness in which past and future dissolve and consciousness rests in an undivided present that contains everything. This is not metaphor. This is a phenomenological description of a specific contemplative state, a state in which the default mode network has quieted, temporal construction has been suspended, and what remains is the pure awareness that the Hindu tradition calls turiya and the Buddhist tradition calls rigpa. Eckhart's language is Christian. His theology is Christian. But the experience he describes transcends any single tradition because it corresponds to a specific alteration in neural processing that is available to any human brain. Buddhism approaches the same territory from a radically different direction. Where Christianity begins with theology and arrives at experience, Buddhism begins with experience and arrives at a description of reality. The Buddha did not start with claims about God or eternity. He started with a simple instruction: sit down, be still, and observe your own mind with sustained, careful attention. And what generations of practitioners discovered, following that instruction, is precisely what modern neuroscience has confirmed. The experience of time is constructed, and the construction can be seen through. The Buddhist analysis is extraordinarily precise. The Abhidharma tradition, the systematic philosophy that emerged from the Buddha's teachings, analyzed temporal experience into its component parts with a rigor that anticipates modern phenomenological neuroscience. They identified the arising and passing of mental events at speeds that correspond to what we now measure as the temporal resolution of neural processing. They described how the mind strings these momentary events into the illusion of continuity, a process they called santana, or the mental continuum. And they argued that this continuum is not a feature of reality but a construction of the mind, that the sense of a continuous self moving through continuous time is the fundamental error from which all suffering arises. This is not vague spiritual wisdom. This is a specific, testable claim about the relationship between temporal construction and the experience of selfhood. And modern neuroscience has, to a remarkable degree, confirmed it. The default mode network, the neural system that constructs the sense of autobiographical time and narrative self, is also the system most strongly associated with rumination, anxiety, depression, and existential suffering. When this network is disrupted through meditation, through psychedelics, through certain forms of brain stimulation, both the sense of temporal flow and the sense of a suffering self diminish together. The Buddhist insight that the construction of time and the construction of suffering are linked is not a philosophical assertion. It is a neuroscientific observation. The great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, writing in the 2nd century, took this analysis to its logical extreme. In his Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the foundational text of Madhyamaka philosophy, Nagarjuna subjected the concept of time to a devastating logical analysis. He argued that the present moment cannot exist independently. It is defined only in relation to the past and the future, but the past no longer exists, and the future does not yet exist. So the present is defined in relation to things that do not exist, which means the present itself has no independent, inherent existence. Time, Nagarjuna concluded, is empty, not non-existent, but lacking the independent, self-sustaining reality that we habitually attribute to it. This is not nihilism. Nagarjuna was careful to distinguish emptiness from nothingness. To say that time is empty is not to say that time does not exist. It is to say that time exists only as a dependent phenomenon, dependent on the mind that constructs it, dependent on the conditions that give rise to it, dependent on the relationships between events, rather than existing as an independent container. This is, almost word for word, what Carlo Rovelli argues in his relational interpretation of quantum mechanics. Time is not a thing, it is a relationship. It exists only in the interaction between systems, not as an independent feature of reality. The Zen tradition expresses this with characteristic directness. The Master Dogen wrote in his Shobogenzo, "Time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away. As time is not marked by coming and going, the moment you climb the mountains is the time being right now." Dogen is not speaking metaphorically. He is describing a mode of awareness in which the ordinary temporal construction has been suspended, and the practitioner perceives directly what the block universe model suggests. All moments exist simultaneously, and the one you call now is not privileged. The mountain you climbed yesterday is not in the past. It is in the timeless ground of reality, still happening. It has always been happening. It will always be happening. Islam contributes a distinct and powerful dimension to this picture. The Quran repeatedly draws attention to the constructed nature of temporal experience, not as a philosophical curiosity, but as a sign of divine reality. The variations in divine time one day equaling 1,000 years in one passage, 50,000 in another, are not contradictions to be explained away. They are deliberate provocations designed to shake the reader out of the assumption that human temporal experience reflects the way things actually are. Time, in Islamic theology, is not a container within which God acts. It is a creation of God, one of the many veils that separate human consciousness from direct perception of the divine. A hadith attributed to the Prophet Muhammad states, "Do not curse time, for God is time." This remarkable statement, in which the divine is identified with time itself, has generated centuries of theological commentary. The Ash'ari school of Islamic theology, which became the dominant theological framework in Sunni Islam, developed a doctrine of continuous creation that resonates powerfully with our scientific picture. According to the Ash'aris, God does not create the universe once and then let it run. God creates the universe anew at every single instant. Each moment is a fresh act of divine creation, with no causal connection to the moment before. The appearance of temporal continuity, the sense that one moment flows into the next in a connected sequence, is not a property of reality, it is a habit of perception. God creates the habit along with the moments, but the underlying reality is one of radical discontinuity, each instant standing alone as a complete, self-sufficient act of divine will. This doctrine, formulated in the 10th and 11th centuries, is a theological anticipation of what neuroscience now describes. The brain creates the illusion of temporal continuity from what is, at a deeper level, a series of discrete moments with no inherent connection. The Ash'ari theologians arrived at this insight not through brain scanning, but through rigorous theological reasoning about the nature of divine power and the contingency of the created world. The Sufi tradition developed this insight into a complete contemplative science. The concept of waqt, the mystical present, became the central organizing principle of Sufi practice. Al-Qushayri, the great 11th century Sufi scholar, defined waqt as the moment in which the practitioner is fully present to God, a moment that is not located on the timeline of past and future, but stands outside it, in what the Sufis called the eternal instant. This is not a metaphor for mindfulness. This is a description of a specific contemplative state in which the brain's temporal construction has been suspended, and consciousness encounters reality without the filtering mechanism of sequential time. Ibn Arabi, perhaps the most intellectually ambitious mystic in Islamic history, developed a framework he called Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being in which time, space, and multiplicity are understood as manifestations of a single, undivided divine reality. For Ibn Arabi, the experience of temporal flow is not an illusion in the sense of being false. It is a tajalli, a self-disclosure of the divine, a way in which the infinite expresses itself through the finite. Time is real, but it is not fundamental. It is a mode of divine self-expression, a lens through which the timeless manifests as the temporal, so that consciousness can engage with it without being destroyed. This is remarkably close to the scientific picture we have constructed. The universe is fundamentally timeless. Consciousness imposes temporal structure to manage the overwhelming totality of timeless information. And the resulting experience of time is not false, it is functional. It is the interface between infinite reality and finite minds. Hinduism, the oldest of the traditions we are examining, provides perhaps the most comprehensive framework for understanding this relationship. The concept of Maya, often translated as illusion, but more accurately understood as creative power or measuring capacity, describes exactly the process we have been tracing. Maya is not a lie. It is the mechanism by which the formless takes form, the infinite becomes finite, the timeless becomes temporal. Time, Kala, is one of Maya's instruments. It is the measuring stick that consciousness uses to navigate a reality that is, in itself, immeasurable. The Upanishads describe this with a precision that is sometimes breathtaking. The Mandukya Upanishad identifies 4 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya. The first 3 are states in which temporal construction is active. In waking and dreaming, time flows. In deep sleep, time is suspended, but so is awareness. Turiya is different. It is the state in which awareness persists, but temporal construction does not. It is consciousness without time, the ground state from which all temporal experience arises and to which it returns. The Kena Upanishad asks, "By whom directed does the mind go toward its objects? By whom commanded does the first breath move? By whom is this speech uttered? What god directs the eyes and ears?" The answer the Upanishad gives is not a god with a name or a form. It is awareness itself, the witnessing consciousness that is prior to everything it witnesses, including time. This is not theology in the Western sense. It is phenomenology, a rigorous investigation of the structures of consciousness, conducted not with brain scanners but with the instrument of attention itself. The great 8th century philosopher Shankara built an entire metaphysical system around this insight. His Advaita Vedanta non-dual philosophy argues that the separation between the individual self and the ultimate reality is itself an illusion produced by Maya. Time, space, causation, and individuality are all constructions of Maya, real at the conventional level, unreal at the ultimate level. When the constructions are seen through, when the mind's filtering mechanisms are suspended and reality is perceived directly, what remains is Brahman, infinite, undivided, timeless consciousness. Shankara used the analogy of a rope mistaken for a snake. In dim light, you see a coiled rope and experience genuine fear, believing it to be a snake. The fear is real. The experience is real, but the snake is not. When the light improves and you see the rope clearly, the snake does not go away, it was never there. In the same way, Shankara argued, when the light of direct awareness illuminates reality clearly, time does not go away. It was never there, not as the fundamental reality, only as an appearance within consciousness. What was always there, and what becomes visible when the appearance is seen through, is the timeless ground of awareness itself. The convergence is remarkable. A physicist looks at the Wheeler-DeWitt equation and finds a timeless universe. A neuroscientist looks at the brain and finds a temporal construction mechanism. A Hindu philosopher looks at consciousness and finds the timeless witness behind the construction. An Islamic theologian looks at creation and finds radical discontinuity veiled by the appearance of continuity. A Buddhist logician looks at time itself and finds it empty of inherent existence. A Christian mystic looks within and finds the eternal now. Different methods, different languages, different centuries, the same destination. And now, standing at the end of this investigation, what can we say? We can say that the physics, the neuroscience, and the contemplative traditions are all pointing at the same extraordinary possibility. Time, the most intimate, the most obvious, the most inescapable feature of your daily experience, may not be what it seems. It may be a construction, built by your brain, from a reality that is itself timeless. The flow you feel is not the universe moving. It is your consciousness reading the universe, converting an infinite, simultaneous, timeless totality into a manageable, sequential, navigable stream. This does not mean time is unreal. It means time is a relationship between consciousness and the deeper reality from which consciousness emerges. Without a mind to construct it, time does not flow. Without a brain to impose the arrow, there is no direction. Without the temporal filter, there is no before and no after, only the vast, undifferentiated, information-saturated ground state that the equations describe and the mystics have tasted. And this means something profound about who you are. If time is your construction, if the flow of moments is something your consciousness generates rather than something it passively receives, then you are not, at the deepest level, a being in time. You are something that creates time. You are not a passenger on a river of moments. You are the source of the river. Every contemplative tradition we have examined says the same thing, in its own language. Christianity says you are made in the image of an eternal God, that your deepest nature participates in the timelessness of the divine. Buddhism says that your true nature is the unconditioned, the awareness that exists prior to the constructions of time, self, and suffering. Islam says that you carry within you the breath of God, the divine spirit that exists outside the created order of temporal reality. Hinduism says that Atman is Brahman, that the awareness at the center of your being is identical to the awareness at the center of the cosmos, and that both are timeless. These are not primitive beliefs waiting to be corrected by science. They are sophisticated frameworks that describe, in the language of their time and culture, precisely the relationship between consciousness and timeless reality that modern physics and neuroscience are beginning to map. We do not know, and may never know, whether the deepest interpretation of these findings is correct. We do not know whether consciousness truly originates in a timeless ground, or whether the experience of timelessness is simply what it feels like when certain brain circuits shut down. We do not know whether the block universe is the final word on the nature of time, or whether future physics will reveal something even stranger. These are open questions, and intellectual honesty requires us to hold them open. But what we can say with confidence is this: the ordinary experience of time, the feeling that the past is gone, the future has not happened, and only this moment is real, is not the final truth about reality. It is a useful construction, built for survival, maintained by specific neural mechanisms, and dissolvable under specific conditions. And on the other side of that dissolution, something awaits that every tradition, in every culture, in every century of recorded human history, has tried to name. Augustine called it the eternal present. The Buddha called it the unconditioned. Eckhart called it the Godhead. The Sufis called it the divine instant. The Upanishads called it turiya. Einstein, in his letter to the Besso family, simply called it what his equations showed him: the truth behind a stubbornly persistent illusion. Whatever name you give it, the possibility remains that the deepest reality is not temporal but timeless, that you are not a creature trapped in the river of time, but a consciousness that generates the river, and that the clock ticking on the wall, the grey hairs multiplying in the mirror, the relentless feeling that this moment is slipping away, all of it may be the most beautiful, the most intricate, and the most necessary illusion that the mind has ever created. The question of what lies beyond it is the oldest question our species has ever asked. We are still asking it, and for the first time in history, the physicists, the neuroscientists, and the contemplatives are beginning to converge on an answer. What that answer ultimately is, whether the timeless ground is divine, or mathematical, or conscious, or something that no language has yet been invented to describe, may be the most important question you will ever consider. Not because the answer changes the world, but because it changes what you think you are, and what you think you are determines everything. If you are a biological machine trapped in the flow of time, then your existence is bounded by birth and death, and every moment that passes is a moment lost forever. But if you are a consciousness that generates time, if the deepest part of you is the timeless awareness from which the temporal construction arises, then the picture changes utterly. Then birth and death are events within your construction, not boundaries of your existence. Then the past is not gone, and the future is not coming. Both are present in the timeless ground that you, at your deepest level, may be. This is not a conclusion. It is an invitation. An invitation to look more carefully at the most obvious thing in your experience, the flow of time, and to ask whether it is truly what it seems. The physicists have given you the mathematics, the neuroscientists have given you the mechanisms, the contemplatives have given you the methods. What you do with all of this is up to you. But whatever you do, you will do it in time. And now you know that time itself may be your own creation.